Hello. Okay, everyone. It's still some places here in the front. Down on the right-hand side here, you have 3 places. Have a.
Nobody wants to sit with you,
No. I will sit here, but. Okay. Everyone. Someone wants? There's places over here. Christian. I see you. David.
Sit next to David. Make him unhappy.
Yeah. Okay. We're ready to start again. A lot of good topics here today, and right now we're gonna listen to Victor.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
For you.
So give him a good applause, and let's start.
Okay, so today I want to talk about developer platforms, right? Especially since it's the second biggest hype right now in the industry. The first one being AI. Everybody's AI, right? All this stuff. And for a good reason, because it's almost like a holy grail that many of us are trying to accomplish. And that holy grail is how can we enable people to do things that are outside their core competency, right? We are building normally platforms. And just to be clear, when I talk about platforms, I talk about something that companies have been building for decades now. This is nothing new. Just the technology might be new and something that we haven't had before. But companies have been trying to build platforms for a very, very long time. And the reason is relatively simple, right? You want to enable people to be able to do stuff themselves instead of bothering you to do it for them. That's the whole idea behind how can I not do whatever they're asking me to do, and the only answer is really to offer whatever you're doing as a service so that others can consume it, right? That's the, it wasn't important anyways. There we go. It will appear. There we go. So, building platforms, right? Now, I specifically want to focus mostly today on a specific part of platforms, which is a portal or a console, right? And now, many people I observed when they start thinking about or building platforms, they think that the portal is a platform, which is completely nonsense because it's not, right? Portal is just a user interface on top of a platform that you're building, right? Whomever of you, and if you tried or is trying to use Backstage, you think that's a platform? Yeah. Now you guess that it's a wrong answer, and then you put the hand down, kind of like, yeah, I'm not going to be embarrassed, but that's what you're doing, right? Anyways, so this is me. I'm going to try to be short today, and then how long is my session? 45. I'm going to try to be much faster than that because I like spending more time on questions and answers. So I'll try to be quick, and then we can talk about and discuss things. This is my face if you ask me questions, so I dare you. So, developer portals, right? One of the most popular projects right now we have is a Backstage. It's a portal, it's a user interface that is designed for people who like pretty colors. Designed for people who like pushing buttons, filling in some fields, and being able to accomplish certain results that are, and this is important, outside of their core competence, right? If you're an infrastructure person, you're not going to use Web UI, but you're going to use maybe Web UI or some other interface to do some other things that are not your main level of expertise, right? The same thing goes for developers, right? If I'm a developer, I'm focused on Node.js, or whatever my language is, I'm building my application, but I don't want to bother you to create a cluster for me, to deploy a database, to manage a database, to do whatever you need to do, and then I go there, click, 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 and I accomplish, I get what I need myself without really being an expert in that something. So that's really what we are trying to do. And the problem that we are facing now as an industry is, actually it's a problem that we were facing for a very, very long time, and it's a recurring problem, and that's that we end up always moving the same things over and over again, right? Kind of like define the thing here, and then do the same thing in a slightly different format over there, and then, I don't know, write something in HCL, and then have the same thing written in YAML because some other application needs YAML, and then have the YAML thing converted into JSON because something else needs JSON, and so on and so forth, right? We're just moving and spending too much time moving files around the system. And the reason that we are doing that, and this is going to sound strange, is that many of us did not yet understand the importance of having an API, right? So instead of asking API, hey, let me do this, let me do that, we're just moving files around. It's a common thing. And it shouldn't be common, at least now that we got Kubernetes, right? And Kubernetes, by the way, many of you probably are thinking that the main purpose reason for existence of Kubernetes is to be able to, it's a thingy that allows you to run containers, right? And that's not the reason for its existence, right? Containers are not the main reason why we have Kubernetes. The main benefit of Kubernetes, and this is important, is that it is an extensible API, right? That's the most important thing you should know about Kubernetes. It's an API that you can extend to infinity, right? And you're doing that even whether you know it or no, right? If you install Argo CD in your Kubernetes cluster, you're extending an API, right? If you install Kyverno, you're extending an API. If you install Ingress controller, you're extending an API, right? Actually, with Ingress, not that much, but you're extending APIs all the time of Kubernetes, and that's absolutely amazing because then we have new endpoints that we can interact with, right? We can say, hey, I want this thing that you just extended, and that thing is going to happen. Now, in a world before Kubernetes, basically this is, or people who did not yet understand Kubernetes, this is more or less what we are doing, right? This is a custom resource definition in Kubernetes, right? It's a long one, doesn't matter. Anybody familiar with the CRDs in Kubernetes? Good. Excellent, right? So custom resource definitions that allow you to define something. In this case, I'm defining that I want, this is the definition of how I'm going to manage my cluster using Kubernetes, right? Which sounds strange, kind of, I'm going to manage Kubernetes clusters using Kubernetes, but that's what we're doing, right? But the same thing would apply to databases or anything like that. Now, I'm not going to torture you to go through all this. The only thing that matters over here is that the definition, actually, let me show you this thing, and I will dare you. You didn't have time to go through it, but look at this thing, right? Do you know what this is? You could probably guess by the name, right? This is how I instruct Backstage how to extend its catalog with the new entity. Now, the important thing about this, even though you cannot guess from this output, is that this is almost exactly the same, just slightly different than what I had before. This is almost the same as that custom resource definition, but yet Backstage doesn't speak Kubernetes, so I had to rewrite that thing into a different thing so that Backstage understands that this thing is the same as the other thing, but is not the same as the other thing. That's basically essentially what we're doing, right? And then if you take a look at this thing, what's the name? This one. This is, again, the same thing, but a different thing that will allow Backstage to create the thing that I showed you before. Right? And then I could now continue with examples of how we actually define the same thing over and over and over again to infinity in different places because everybody needs the same data, but is unwilling to speak the same language. Now, what we are going to do today is I'm going to show you how we can remove all that through an API, right? How we can remove all that repetition by something called discoverability, right? Because one of the main advantages of using APIs is not only that we can instruct APIs to do something for us, like create this deployment, delete the pod, that's what David did in his previous session, infinite amount of times, or edit this, not only operations, but there is discoverability, right? We can go to Kubernetes API and say, tell me what you have. Tell me what are the resources that you have available to you. And then I can say, I'm interested in this one. and go back to the API and ask, okay, now what is the schema of that thing, right? All fully dynamic, and then you can paint those fields and buttons and drop-down lists and whatever else people need to have something very colorful in a web UI. And we can see that through this. This is the simple cluster that I just created that has a bunch of things, right? And all those, what matters with all those things is that these are all the API endpoints that I can use with my Kubernetes cluster to do something. Like I can create a database, I can create providers, whatever that is, right? And so on and so forth. So I extended already my Kubernetes cluster. I instructed it how to create interfaces that other applications and people and processes and what's not can use. And in this case, the one that we are going to use today, and I'm going to show you in examples, is this one. No, too long. Let's do this, right? I created something called SQL claims. I will be using Crossplane today. Anybody familiar with Crossplane? Huh, very good, excellent. If my boss is watching, I want to raise. I'm not going to talk about Crossplane, so no worries about that. I mean, not much, really. That's not the main point here. I'm just using it as examples, right? But what matters with Crossplane, or any Kubernetes something, is that I created this thing, claims, Okay, there we go. No, that's not what I wanted. Okay. I created already in my cluster something called SQL. Basically, this is how we will enable, and you will see it in a live demo in a second, how I'm going to enable everybody in my organization to manage databases without knowing much about databases. I'm transforming my database experience into a service that others can consume, right? And this is the definition of that something. It's not really exciting one. Like it has a list of databases somebody can enter. It has the, I don't know, here is actually the list of databases. It has different fields that you will see soon, like, hey, what is the size of the database that you want to use? Now, what I'm going to do is try to instruct a web UI to use it. And I'm going to use port today. I have it somewhere opened, maybe not. There we go. I'm going to use port today, but the same logic applies in any type of web UI, something, whatever you're using, right? With this important node that you will discover in a second. Now, the important thing here is that typically, if you're anybody familiar with port? No? A little bit. Cool. It's a cool project. Service. You need to pay for it, but it's cool. The important thing here is that when port started, it had different mechanisms how you can define the fields and buttons and all this stuff. But right now, I have none of those things. You can see my catalog is completely empty. Services that people can do is empty. And data sources is somewhere. Am I not logged in, maybe? There we go. And there is nothing configured in it right now. Now, what I'm going to do is use a very simple mechanism that says, you know what? I don't know what you have in your clusters, I don't care, but I do care that you should go to the cluster, find all the API endpoints, and since I have a couple of hundred endpoints, I'm limiting that to something called composite resource definition, whatever that something is, right? I'm basically telling port, get me all the information from the cluster completely dynamically and generate everything you might need. And to do that, I'm going to click resync. And then, if you're lucky and my demo doesn't fail, or it will fail, then we're going to call David. He's an expert in all things failing. But I'm going to fix it. I have a very elaborate method how to fix everything. Oh no, actually it's working. And you can see that without me instructing it anything, it went to the cluster and discovered there is something called SQL claim, there is something called app claim, there is something called cluster claim. It generated automatically ways how to create those things. It doesn't know what those things are. And that's a good thing. It shouldn't know what those things are. The only purpose of any web UI in the world is to communicate with APIs and paint it on a screen, whatever that is. Anyways, we can create stuff, whatever the stuff is. We can update stuff, and we can delete most of the stuff. For some reason, one of the three things is missing from the delete thing. But here we go. Appeared, right? So it automatically discovered everything that I have to offer to my users. Now, the one thing that, and I could just go now here and say, hey, those are the fields that were discovered from my cluster. Any user can just fill it in, click the button, and you're done, right? Or, alternatively, you can say, because I configured it in a way that it discovers the schema, what schema might be big, and it takes into account or shows only the things that are required fields, right? And then I can fine-tune it. Instead of defining everything from scratch, I can say, let me see, where is this? Here. Okay, but you know what? The name that is not required, I'm going to show it on the screen as well. I'm just going to change it to true and save it, right? And now the name here appears, or ref name, to be more precise. You can customize it as much as you want, or you can just let it run. I'm going to customize it a bit more, and you will see soon why, if I find out what. I'm going to change this to, let's call it composition. And I'm going to say, instead of a text, let's use select. Let's give people the option to create databases in AWS, PostgreSQL, PostgreSQL. No, I don't know how to type PostgreSQL. There we go. I'm going to allow people to use Azure, also PostgreSQL. And I'm going to add another one and say, why don't you be able to run databases in Google as well, right? Now, I'm not inventing things. All those things exist in my cluster. My cluster is acting as a control plane. Port is just discovering what things are possible. What did I do wrong? Tell me. Now it disappeared. Here. Azure. I'm not going to use Azure, so let's face it, doesn't matter. No, I'm kidding. Azure is cool. And let's do one more change, just for the sake of argument. What should I change? Okay, size. I'm going to change the name, size, and I'm going to also give people options, not to get confused, and we're going to let them have small, medium, and large databases, right? Because if I start explaining people what T3 something something means in AWS, they're going to freak out. There's one more thing I need to change because this user interface, and same applies to anything, discovered everything it needs, but it cannot discover things that do not exist, right? My cluster does not know what to do when you create a database. I mean, it knows what to do when you instruct Kubernetes to create a database, but anybody interacting directly with Kubernetes should be fired, right? That's a rule in every company today. If you execute kubectl something something, you should be jobless, right? The better way to do it, and this is something that it couldn't discover, is that we should use the data generated, push it to Git, and then let Argo CD do the magic, right? And to do that, I'm going to use GitHub Actions. I already have a GitHub action configured. I just need to teleport, where is it? Organization, DevOps Paradox, probably right. The repository is this one. and I want it to fire GitOps YAML. So I'm keeping this to be extremely dumb. This UI doesn't know how to do anything. The only thing it knows is how to get schema from somewhere and how to send data somewhere else without understanding what that something else and what the schema is and so on and so forth, right? So now the chances that this will work are very, very slim, but let's try it. I'm going to use AWS. Now I'm not anymore an operator. I'm not infrastructure guy. I'm not a database expert. Now I'm a developer, right? And I'm going to create, and as a developer, I said, okay, I want a database. Excellent. Where do I want it? I want it in AWS, and I want it to be Postgres. What is going to be the name of the database? Silly demo. The name of the silly demo as well, whatever that is. The namespace 18, because that's the only namespace I created in advance. How big the database should be, small, of course. And the database version we want is 16.2. Execute. That's all I need to know as a developer, right? Because somebody in my organization created extended Kubernetes cluster, created controllers that will do the heavy lifting and so on and so forth. And we just pushed it to Git. And of course it failed. And we don't know why. But we will see the details. This is not part of what I prepared. It might work. It might not. Oh, yeah, I know what it is. The name of the repository is, I think, not the correct one. How did they call it? Port CRD's demo. I think that this is the name of the repository. Yes, it is. Okay, so wrong name. I will fix it. Create SQL. I will fix it right away. What is the name? I already forgot. Port CRD's demo. Port CRD's demo. Let's try again. Let's try again. Create. What do we say? AWS. Silly. No. Not so silly. Demo. Same here. Namespace 18. 16.2. Execute. In progress. Cool. So, what is happening while this is happening? Let me explain how all that works, how the whole process. And remember, I'm not talking about specific tools. I'm using specific tools, but the logic works with infinite amount of combination of tools that you can use. So this is what I did before I came here, right? I have a Kubernetes cluster, and that cluster acts as a control plane. It's a place where we manage things. If you lived in a previous century and worked in a previous century, that's what we would call tunnel servers, right? Servers from where we do stuff. It's Kubernetes. I have Crossplane. Crossplane is awesome. I have to say that for legal reasons. We have port over there. Port is a UI. GitHub is where we store the desired state. And Argo CD, it would work the same with Flux that is doing something with the cluster, right? And the only place where I actually did any substantial work, the only place where I'd actually defined something is here, right? I extended the API, I created controllers. They know how to create databases, clusters, and applications for now. Port went and discovered what is available in that cluster and showed us 3 options: SQL, app, cluster, whatever that is. I, developer, interacted with Port. Port did nothing special. The only thing that Port did is convert that schema into forms, take the input that I put into those forms, and send it to GitHub Actions. It knows, it has zero idea. It doesn't know even whether it should generate YAML or JSON or speak Rust. It has no idea of any of those things. It should be done with this. Send to GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions created manifest. I can show you the action. It is relatively straightforward. Argo CD is constantly monitoring that Git repository and detected that something new was created there. assuming that it worked. It went to the cluster, it created a custom resource. Crossplane, since it is in charge of that custom resource, created some stuff in AWS, right? That's what happened behind the scenes. And I have no idea why I have those numbers down there. I will show you GitHub actions that I have. Again, you can do it with Jenkins if you're a masochist as well. It's allowed. Basically, this is nothing special. I just take the input, put it into a file, get the type of the resource and the name and the namespace from the fields. I use that to generate a unique name for the file. That's all it's doing. And then putting that file to that directory, to that file, putting the temporary file to that path, and then pushing it back to Git. It's nothing special happening here, right? If it worked, and it probably didn't, it did, actually. You can see that this file was generated for me. I can show you what that file is. That's a SQL claim. This is the name I typed, this is the namespace I typed, this is the size I chose, this is the version I chose, and so on and so forth. And Argo CD synchronized it into the cluster, right? And from there on, if I didn't make a mistake, are you trolling me right now? Making fun of me, huh? Because I'm a foreigner, is that? I'm kidding. Let's open Argo CD and see whether it worked, right? Here we go. This is the A team. This is the file that was synchronized. That's what we generated. These are all the AWS resources. There's many, because whatever you can accomplish in Google with one resource, you need 57 in AWS. That's the situation. That's how it works. Not my fault. Blame AWS. And as a result, this is what Crossplane created. No, what did I call it? Not so silly demo, right? These are the same resources, same thing created by Crossplane, AWS now doing whatever it's doing. Some things are not yet done because it takes approximately 15 minutes to create RDS in the AWS. And that's about it. Basically, that's basically, we're talking about a day of work in total to create a fully operational platform. Maybe 2, if you fail first time. And I said I'm going to try to do it fast. I did it fast. I want to open it for your questions. You're very silent. Do I have more slides? No, I don't.
How? Där.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for the talk. I had a question because the talk is called is saying that console should be dumb, right?
Yes.
So I'm wondering, do you have examples of pitfalls about people trying to make the console too smart?
Yes,
so what
backstage.
Would be right. So when it comes to the different tools out there, you have obviously Backstage, Port, and a few others. How would you? What's your thought about how the different products that are now today, how mature they are?
I think that they're all, most of them are immature for a simple reason, because they're trying to do too much, right? And they're trying to solve a problem in the wrong place. Any of you is here any front-end developer in the audience, right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You will be ashamed to do so, but try, right? When you develop front-end, right, you don't put much logic into the front-end. You talk to some back-end API, and back-end is doing jobs, right? Am I at least close? Huh? Yes, in the ballpark. In the ballpark. Good enough. I'm not a front-end developer. I'm guessing. I was. I'm never coming back. I'm kidding. So yeah, they're all immature from my perspective, simply because they're trying to do the job that better tools are doing, and that job is what Kubernetes does, what Argo CD does, and so on and so forth. Right. All I really want from a console is to be able to discover schemas and to be able to send data somewhere without even knowing what that something is. That's all. That's all I need. You could literally be, in some cases, you could be faster by ignoring all the existing third-party consoles and developing it yourself. It's not that hard. More.
Anyone? You have such a quiet crowd.
Yeah, it's Norway, I know. You know, when I left Barcelona airport, everybody's yelling at the airport. When I arrived here, it's kind of silence.
All right. How do you provision? I didn't understand how you connect to RDS or any other native AWS service from within the cluster.
Great question. I will definitely get a raise because the answer is Crossplane. I work for Crossplane, by the way. Crossplane is open source project. So I use Crossplane for that. Crossplane has two important parts, right? One part, and in my opinion, less important part, is that it can, when you install some provider, like I installed AWS provider, okay, and when you install some provider, AWS, Azure, Google, GitHub, whatever, it extends your Kubernetes cluster by creating controllers and CRDs like those. Like you can see VPC, EPAM scopes. I honestly don't know what that does in AWS, but it's something, right? So you install provider, think of it like Terraform module in a way, and it extends Kubernetes depending on which provider you installed, and now I could literally, if I would want, this is so stupid, something better, let me find users in SQL database, for example, right? I could define it as a Kubernetes manifest like anything else I'm defining in Kubernetes, you know, kind this, API this, spec this, and that. kubectl apply, and I would create in this cluster a custom resource called user, and Crossplane, on the other hand, would know how to create that something, in this case in AWS, but wherever it is, right? So, number one, extend Kubernetes with custom resource definitions and controllers that do things somewhere, including the same cluster. The other more important thing is what we call composition, which allows you to define new CRD, not CRDs that come from third parties like those, but your own, like the SQL that I created, that's the CRD that I created, and allows you to tell Kubernetes, okay, whenever somebody creates SQL, for example, or X that I defined, those are all the resources under these combinations and permutations and what's to know that you should create. So as a result, when I created that composition, I instructed the Crossplane that whenever somebody creates SQL claim, and if labels say AWS, then manage those resources, whatever they are, right? I forgot your question. Did I answer it? Yeah. Cool.
Can you also provision lambdas from within?
Anything. I mean, not literally anything. There might be things that do not exist in existing providers, and then you create your own provider, right? But in theory, everything. If you're talking about AWS, Azure, and Google have close to 100, and I'm saying intentionally close because you never know that it may be some lost resource somewhere. 100% give or take coverage, and then if you say, oh, I work with, I don't know, something obscure that only nobody uses, then you would need to create your own provider.
I thought I was done with providers using Terraform.
I hope you're done with Terraform. Yeah, but conceptually it's the same, similar thing. Like providers in Terraform instruct Terraform how to translate your code in Terraform case HCL into something somewhere. This is similar conceptually, except that it's Kubernetes native, drift detection, reconciliation, GitOps, all the good things that we like about Crossplane, plus those compositions. Anybody else? How much time do I have? It's all good. I'm good. Ah, go.
So now you have opened the Crossplane box. How do you version all these things together? Say you make your own providers and all these things. There's a lot of things that's moving, and if you change something, everything that's deployed will change as well, right?
Yeah,
How
so
do you version and keep track that you don't do anything silly when you change things? Or, yeah.
I mean, you do silly things. Why would I care? Okay, kidding. We follow Kubernetes practices or logic or whatever, right? You can change composition, right, without changing the version of the API. Let's say that you have a composition X that is v1 alpha 1. If you change the composition, keeping the same version, then those changes will be applied to all the claims, all people that actually created resources based on that something. If you change the version, then it will be new version that people will need to opt in, right? The same thing like you have Ingress 1, you got Ingress 2 eventually, because Ingress 1 was horrible. 2 is still horrible, but we got it. And then you had to opt in, right? It wasn't, the changes when you upgrade Kubernetes cluster, if there are changes to v1 that you're using, then they are automatically applied, but you need to opt for the next version. That's the logic that we are using. So it depends really, it's your choice whether you want to apply changes to everybody or opt-in mechanism. Run.
Yeah, so I've had the crossplane discussion a couple of times in a couple of different companies, like should we use crossplane or no? And an interesting argument that keeps coming back is like, well, if we use crossplane, we'll get some sort of state living on the clusters in the form of like, you know, the resources that are created, they'll have some ID references that need to be like preserved. So the reason that's an issue is because people generally that I've worked in will want to have like stateless clusters. So what do you say to people like that who like want to have stateless clusters but at the same time want to use crossplane?
So ignoring special case, which I'm going to get back to, those are Kubernetes resources like any other. It's not, there is no significant difference between crossplane something and let's say Kubernetes deployment, right? We don't keep state in the same way as other tools are having state. We don't have the state. We have the resource, like you defined RDS instance with region, this or that, right? It's YAML that you put to Kubernetes API and is stored in etcd, right? That's the only thing we care. You could, in theory and in practice, say, you know what? I'm going to shut down this cluster completely, create a new one, install Argo CD, point it to the same repository where I keep those manifests, and it will automatically continue working, right? So there is no state as if Terraform state, right? Because every iteration of reconciliation, Crossplane goes to the API of, let's say, AWS says, do you have a database called Victor? Says yes or no. If the answer is no, I'm going to create it. If the answer is yes, what's the difference? Do I need to update, do something? So we don't have a traditional state, which we just have the resources that you defined and, you know, and applied with kubectl or Argo CD and so on and so forth. There is one exception that is mostly applies to AWS. And that exception, some resources in AWS, and that exception is that there are certain resources in AWS that cannot be named. Like, for example, if you create an RDS, you can call it Victor, right? But if you create a VPC, you cannot name it in advance. AWS will auto-generate an ID of that VPC, right? And in that cases, we still don't keep the state, but we inject a label called external name that has that auto-generated ID. As long as you know what that label is, either by putting it back to that YAML or backing up etcd or something like that. Whatever I said before will work. So no state, just the resource definitions. And you can always back up etcd and so on and so forth. But same logic like Kubernetes in general. And you should be using GitOps. Anybody else?
Expanding, oh, that's loud. Expanding on that question.
Okay.
Blue-green switches and not getting a race condition.
Can you give me some example?
If you have one production cluster running up cross-plane, deploying infrastructure, and then you spin up a new passive one, and you import these definitions, what happens?
Nothing, just keeps working. I mean, because it goes, it always does. You could even have 3 clusters with crossplane running in parallel, having the same definitions. They need to be exactly the same. And all 3 of them will go to AWS and ask, do you have this? Yes or no, right? They're all going to go to API, ask for the differences in between the desired state and actual state, and do something. They might try to do the same thing twice, but doing the same thing twice in idempotent world is not a big deal. It's not a problem, so no problems that I can think of. I mean, something might always pop up, but in general, I shouldn't see any issue there. Now, I wouldn't, did you say blue-green?
Yeah.
Do you want to have a long discussion why blue-green is a bad idea? I mean, Canary rolling updates, if you want simple Canary deployments, are always a better idea than blue-green. This is a short version of it. Blue-green was created a long time ago as an idea when it was time-consuming and difficult to create things, and we had to keep things running in parallel, because if I don't run it in parallel and want to switch back to where I was, it's going to take me 3 days to do it, because it took a whole weekend just to do a release, and we didn't have dynamic stuff and Kubernetes and so on and so forth, right? Now it's kind of like rolling, I don't need to keep anything running 2 things in parallel. Rolling back is just kind of like going back to the previous revision, right? Kind of like spins up and does, everything takes a few seconds, so it should, I don't see the good reasons for blue-green these days, assuming that you're running Kubernetes and all the jazz. Canary deployment is much better. And Kubernetes itself it's not Canary deployment, it's rolling updates, but even Kubernetes itself and even the resources that you're running today in Kubernetes, they're doing rolling updates, meaning that progressively upgrading or downgrading rather than running things in parallel, like blue-green. But if you want to do blue-green, yeah, you can run two crossplanes in parallel.
3 minutes left. One last question.
What if I answer it in 1 minute?
We'll see. The statistic says no.
Yeah, well, I feel bad now because this isn't really a question, but an answer to the previous question. Because I encountered that specific thing when we migrated our infra cluster, where we manage the other environments. And if you have differing states, or like a crossplane in one tries to do something else than the other, they will just cancel it or like apply both. Like the state will just flip. So it works, but it's you need to make sure that they're the same.
You shouldn't be doing it, just to be clear.
Still okay. We were fast enough. Another one?
See,
Last?
I told you so.
Oh, sorry. Anyone?
Last chance.
Hello. Yeah. So now when the user is a bit further away and just see the abstraction, how do you deal with kind of properties that are immutable, like changing the SKU with the recreate the resource and things like that?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Some cloud resources, there are some properties you would cause it to be recreated, like if you call it with Terraform. So how do you deal with that? Because the user doesn't interact with the cloud, so they don't get the feedback.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's the importance of compositions, right? Because I cannot give you a straight answer how to deal with it, because it depends from case to case, right? But the ability to, you as an expert in something, abstract that and implement all the things that need to happen in the background while actually not exposing it as annoyance to everybody else is what we're aiming for, right? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer. Kind of, we would need to go through exact response. Sometimes you might need to, God forgive, destroy the database because the only option is to create a new one. So depends, but you can abstract that in a way that from the user perspective, you're updating the database. I'm just following my own example, right? Behind the scenes, I will have to create a new one, migrate all the schema, move the data, do whatever needs to be done. But from the user perspective, at least we can abstract it in a way. But you're still in control. You can, again, depends on the case. You have at your disposal the ability to create and manage any type of resources. Now, whether that means that you're going to spin up some job that will do something to the schema and then use the data from that job as a dependency of some other thing but if you want, we can speak through a more concrete example and then I might be more helpful.
We'll stop at that. Thank you very, very much, Victor. Give him a good applause.
Thank you.